Welcome everyone. I'm really excited to share some great news. MeldRx is now officially certified as a B11 Decision Support Intervention module. In today's video, we'll focus on one of our favorite features of this module, that is the EHR integration. As many of you probably already know, DSI is not just an API integration. It involves a number of UI components, specifically around the configuration management and more importantly around how the alerts are rendered. One of the biggest challenges that we had when we were designing this module was how will we make sure that the processes would seamlessly integrate with the EHR clinical workflows while also making sure that it would meet all the requirements. We hope that you would like what you see today. For the demo today, I will be covering 3 different scenarios. In the first scenario, I will show you how you can integrate the DSI module with any G10 certified EHR using the EHR launch. I'll be using Cerner as an example today. We have been using Epic in many of our recent videos, so the process works the same and it's good to kind of cover both of them. The second scenario is for our MeldRx customers. Since MeldRx is also a G10 certified module, we'll show you how it works within the platform. Finally, and most importantly, we'll show you how this module can be integrated with any EHR, even if they don't support FHIR. This is a pretty cool feature that we have built that we are calling dynamic data push that allows an EHR to render our alerts dashboard in real time while pushing the data. This is really important if your EHR doesn't support the EHR launch, or there are also scenarios where the FHIR server might not be in sync with the EHR all the time. So you have a patient and you need to render the alerts. How do you basically dynamically do it on the data available at that time? So I will be walking through these 3 scenarios in a little more detail before we jump into the demos. So let's do that now. I'll give you a quick tour of the MeldRx DSI module. I'm not going to go into the details of how this works as we have covered that in other videos. The focus of today's video is to basically focus on the EHR integration. So we'll try to stick to that. But at a high level, I am logged into the MeldRx app and I have a patient screen. From this patient screen, I can click on a patient and it will launch me into a patient chart from where we can see all the alerts. All these alerts are displayed based on the configuration that has been done in that particular workspace. The configuration is managed under settings. We have a functionality called extensions. This is where the user of the workspace or the user of the EHR can go and activate extensions. Activating extensions is a very simple process. You can go and search from publicly available extensions that can be predictive or evidence-based, or you could even publish your own extensions or own apps that can then be used with your data. So again, we have covered all of this in a lot details in other videos, so I'm not going to go too deep into that. The key point from an integration perspective is that this particular patient chart that we are actually launching from here and how we have been showing it in all the demos, how does this basically get launched from another EHR with full integration? So let's jump into the first scenario and see how we do that. Okay, so let's walk through the process, how this would work with any G10 certified EHR. A certified EHR means that that particular EHR would have some kind of a FHIR API interface. And what we do is we basically connect to this FHIR API through a linked workspace. If you're not familiar with the linked workspace concept, we did a very detailed video on that. We'll put a link in the description below to that video. Basically, a linked workspace acts like a proxy that can connect with the FHIR API behind the scenes for reading and in many cases writing data. In this case, what we are saying is that there is a MeldRx DSI module that is connected to a linked workspace to the FHIR API. Now the provider or the users of the provider organization can come into this DSI module and manage their configurations, which are the extensions or the apps that they want to activate, just like we showed in the video today. So that UI part and everything works just like it works in MeldRx. The key difference in here is that from the EHR, at some point, the provider is in a patient chart. And from that patient chart, they can use the default EHR launch functionality. That EHR long functionality will launch the alerts dashboard, the MeldRx alerts app from within the MeldRx module. That dashboard will pull the data from FHIR and based on the configuration, render the alerts that are relative to that patient. These alerts can then be used to provide feedback. All that feedback is captured in the system and it stays within the MeldRx module. That alert feedback can also be exported and brought into the EHR in various different ways. So that's at a high level. Let's now see this in action with a Cerner EHR. I am in the Cerner developer portal. Cerner makes it actually pretty simple to configure and test an EHR launch. So what you need to do is you go into the particular application that you're testing with and you can update this Smart Launch URI. Once you have updated the Smart Launch URI, you will automatically get a button that says Test Sandbox. We also covered this, how we do it in Epic. It is a little different where they actually allow you to select the app, but the end result is the same. On the MeldRx side, we have a linked workspace that has been configured with Cerner, and you can actually get the EHR launch URL from within the settings. So we have made it very simple to just copy it from here. And just like I showed it in the other workspace, that workspace has some extensions that have been configured based on which the different alerts will be rendered. Once this all setup is done, which is a one-time setup, it is pretty simple. If I go in here and I'm just going to say I want to launch the particular sandbox. So now you have to assume that we are within Cerner. I am basically on a patient select screen. I'm going to select any patient in that Cerner interface. And then as I'm clicking on this, you have to assume like it's basically launching an EHR launch app. And it will go straight away come into the same screen with that particular patient selected. I can obviously see the documents that get loaded in here in a second. So it's obviously pulling all the documents, but it is also pulling based on the extensions that I had configured. I can now see different kind of alerts that are being shown to me. This is actually pulling data from Cerner. So in this case, you can see it's actually pulling the name. This is a very simple kind of a CDS hooks app that we are connecting to from the outside. But then in this case, it's actually a very simple tasks app that looks through the data of the patient and then renders some task in there. So very simple integration that with a single click, I was able to go from Cerner directly into the patient chart, the chart that we were looking at, to basically meet the requirement and kind of see all the alerts based on what I had configured in there. So that was basically how you could configure it with any G10 EHR that supports EHR launch. Now let's take a look at how will this work for existing MeldRx G10 customers. So in case of MeldRx G10, it is pretty much similar because we are using an EHR launch. The main difference here is that we actually generate the launch for the EHRs too. So the scenario here is that we have a certified EHR that is using MeldRx for their G10. Obviously, they don't have a FHIR interface connection, but they have a connection and the FHIR interface is provided by MeldRx. Now, just like we showed before, the providers can go in there, manage their configuration, all the extensions that they want to activate or other settings that they want to control in there. The difference in here is that now within their patient chart, they will have some kind of a button. And what that button is ultimately doing is it is basically making a call to the backend of MeldRx to generate a context. And we'll be seeing this in a demo in a minute in here. But what that context button returns is a URL. And then the EHR can simply launch that URL, which will basically bring up the alerts dashboard in a single sign-on that is already provider logged in with the patient selected. And then the rest of the process just works the same as we had seen before, where they can configure and see the alerts based on the patient's context. And then they can also submit the feedback, which is all stored back into the system. Let's go ahead and now see this in action. I'm back in a standalone workspace with a patient already added to that workspace, Alice Newman. But this time, instead of launching the patient from here, we want to launch it from an EHR. So to show this part of the demo, I'm actually going to be using Postman so that I can actually show you how you will be able to create the context from an EHR and then launch it from there. So I'm going to change my screen to go to Postman here. I'm in Postman and I'm going to show you basically the call. But before I can make the call, obviously I need to basically get a token. This is the call that I make to first get the token based on the app that I have already registered. Once I've got the token, I can basically use it for all the calls that are going from there. So the only call that really matters is this one call, which is to create that EHR context. And we have made it really, really simple. So all you need to pass in that call is the patient identifier. And again, if you are familiar with MeldRx, you know that as you connect with most of our integrations, we don't require you to know the patient ID. You can always make all the calls using the patient identifier, which is the ID of the patient in your EHR. So in this case, this is Alice's Newman's identity that was in the CCDA that was later stored in the FHIR server. So using that, I can just make a call to the EHR launch context endpoint. And if I just click the send button, what it will return me is a launch context. Along with that, it actually returns me an app launch URL. What I'm going to do in here is I'm just going to copy this URL from here. Now, obviously in the EHR, you will have a whatever way it works best for you, where you have the URL back and you can open it into a browser. I'm just going to go into a browser in here and open an incognito window and just copy that URL in there. And you will see that it basically again launches me into the same Alice Newman's chart, just like the one that we were seeing it from here. So if I open it from here, it's the same chart, same basically alerts that are showing in there. But now we are launching it from EHR, fully integrated, all the UI, all the features available in there. So those were again the two different options where we are leveraging the G10, the FHIR functionality behind the scenes. And as the alert dashboard is launched, it is connecting to the FHIR server in the backend and pulling the data from there and then rendering the alerts. Let me now show you a third option that we have built. So I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint here. Okay, so I'm going to move to this option that we call the dynamic data push. And again, just to kind of reiterate what I had said before, this is an option where for some reason your EHR or your FHIR API provider does not support an EHR launch context, or more commonly, as we learn this from many partners that we are working with, is that the FHIR is not in real-time sync. So the provider is working in the EHR, they're working on a chart of a patient, and the data is not in FHIR. So if they try to launch an alerts dashboard, that data is not going to be available. So it can really cause some issues. The way this particular scenario works is the first part that we had talked about is pretty much the same. But in this case, when the provider is in the patient chart, they have the ability to basically upload what we call as a payload. And this payload could be like a CCDA. This could be any kind of format that the EHR can upload. It can be a FHIR bundle. It can be a selective part of the patient chart. What they can do is they can use that data to create the EHR context that was created previously with only the patient ID. So instead of passing the identifier, they are actually passing the patient context along with the data in that. The rest of the process works pretty much the same, other than that the context is actually then used to kind of create a temporary hold in the FHIR workspace. And then you can basically launch the alerts dashboard, which configures the alerts, shows it, and the feedback and everything else kind of works the same. Again, let's take a look at how this actually works. And in order to show that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually go back to the workspace that I was in, and I'm going to delete Alice Newman from here. So that way we are starting with a workspace that is totally blank. There is no patient in there. And then I'm going to go back to Postman to kind of launch this particular scenario. The last time we did it, the launch context, obviously we had passed the patient identifier. So I'm going to pick up a different method this time, which is very similar, but instead of passing a patient identifier, I'm actually uploading a complete CCDA. Again, as I said, this could be a partial CCDA. We also have other data formats that can be uploaded. But the key thing here is that I'm actually loading the data, not just passing a patient identifier to the workspace. So I'm going to go ahead and click the send button in here. And again, just like before, it is going to return me a URL. I can copy that URL from here, and I'm going to go and open it into a new browser now. So let me go back to an in private window and open it there. And again, just like before, it is going to launch the same dashboard and show me all the patient details in there. Now, what has happened behind the scenes is if I go to this screen and I refresh it, it's basically created that patient and uploaded the data, converted that CCDA into FHIR, And that's how where you see that all the alerts and everything else is the same. We also have options where you might not want to load this data, or if you load the same data twice or thrice, it will automatically reconcile it. So there are a number of ways this can be configured, but the key idea there is that all the data does not need to be in the system before. If you have a workflow currently where you are uploading all the CCDAs or uploading the data nightly or some other frequency, but you still want to leverage the alerts, you can actually do it in a real time and post that along with the patient chart. We hope you like what we showed you here. Please reach out to us if you have any questions or thoughts. We look forward to working with all of you. Thank you so much for watching.